Please turn with me, if you would, to Matthew chapter 11. This morning, I would like to talk about a subject that I covered last time in Kansas, but sometimes I feel like I need to preach on something more than once, not just so that you have an opportunity to hear it, but that I might have another opportunity to try to preach it, to try to understand it. I want to talk about the Cave of Machpelah. The Cave of Machpelah. We'll be going to Genesis 23 and some other places, Lord willing, but before we begin, I'd like to start in Matthew 11. It says, "And it came to pass, when Jesus had made an end of commanding his 12 disciples, he departed thence to teach and to preach in their cities." And if you're reading along the Gospel of Matthew, what that means is that he had just sent forth his 12 disciples, who ultimately we refer to as the 12 apostles. He had sent them out two by two to go over for the lost sheep of Israel. They were to go to different parts and go into various cities preaching the gospel. He was sending forth the gospel and through his disciples. And while they were gone, he likewise went from place to place. Evidently, he had said, "Go for so long, and then we'll meet back at a certain place." So they're gone, and now he is himself going out. And remember, Jesus was the great shepherd. He is the great shepherd, and he's out tending to his sheep. If you wonder why is it that he went around from place to place, well, the answer is because he was a good shepherd. He had other sheep that he needed to go and minister to. So in verse 2, we find that there are some disciples of John the Baptist, who come and visit him during this time. Now, when John had heard in the prison the works of Christ, he sent two of his disciples and said unto him, "Art thou he that should come, or do we look for another?" And Jesus answered and said unto them, "Go and show John again those things which you do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he whomsoever shall not be offended in me." Now, when we look at this, and of course the other gospels give us similar accounts of what happened. Some have said that John was still doing fine and he sent his disciples for their benefit. And that could possibly be the case. But let me tell you what my impression is of this scripture, and I trust this is of the Lord. John the Baptist readily admitted that he said that Jesus must increase and I must decrease. The pinnacle of John the Baptist's life was to baptize Jesus in the River Jordan. That was why he was raised up. And the prophets bear witness of that. Both Isaiah and Malachi said, "I'm going to send my messenger before my face." Right? He was there to herald the Lord Jesus Christ. And if you read the latter part of chapter 3 of John, you'll see that John knew exactly who this was. This is the one who came from heaven. So there was no failing at that time as far as John's perception and understanding of who he was. But I think that now John has been cast into prison. And my view of this, and I believe this is correct, John is getting impatient. Okay? John has gone all in. He has expectations. He's the last of the Old Testament prophets. It's understandable that he would be this way. John is saying, he sends his disciples because John is saying, "All right, cousin, anytime now. Are you the one who should come? Are we doing it? I've spent my whole life in the wilderness. I've been this crazy man going out preaching. I've done everything I've been told to do. When are you going to ascend the throne? When are you going to come forward?" That's the sense that I get. And if you think that I'm being harsh on John the Baptist by saying that he's going through some discouragement, let me remind you that pretty much everybody in the Old Testament goes through that. Right? Abraham, we can read about the time that Abraham was discouraged. He lied about his wife twice because he was afraid and discouraged. And remember, he helped the Lord out by having Ishmael because he was discouraged. He was impatient. He was waiting. And we can find where Isaac did the same thing. And Jacob, we can find where Jacob was discouraged, and we can find where David was discouraged, and we can find where Jeremiah was ready to give it up, but he couldn't. And we see where Ezekiel was, and Habakkuk, and the list goes on. You can find in the life of everyone here this idea that you go forward, you can believe something, but the circumstances and things that are unfolding just don't seem to match up. That's life. And so I personally want you to consider in this set of scripture that John is discouraged. And he sends these disciples to Jesus just to confirm, what is it? Are you the one? Am I on the right track? Is this? And notice what Jesus did. It doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus did all of these miracles in front of him, although he had done all of them by this time. He had healed the sick and the leper and so on, and perhaps there were some that were done right there. I'm sure that the Lord took the opportunity in the presence of these disciples who were visiting from John to once again manifest his glory, once again do these signs and miracles to confirm to the Jewish mind that, yes, I am the Messiah. I'm the one that all the prophets said would happen, because Isaiah had said that these are the things that would happen. But notice the list that Jesus gives. He says, tell John that the blind can see and the lame can walk. And the lepers no longer have leprosy. They're no longer outcasts. They've been cleansed and purified and healed. That's never happened before, right? And the deaf can now hear. There's obviously a spiritual aspect to each of these, as you can see, right? And the dead are raised up. But then listen with this. The poor have the gospel preached to them. And I think of all of the signs that John was looking for, the Lord obviously knew what he was doing here. Notice that's where John's heart was. He says, just don't forget why I've come. I'm ministering to the poor. I'm ministering to those that are broken down and beaten down, because I'm saying there is pardon, there is relief, there is blessing. I will heal you. That's the one that John was looking for. Of all of this list, the fact that Jesus just had to remind John, I'm here for the poor. I'm here to preach the gospel, the good tidings, the gladness of entering into his presence, that relief. And if you think about it, we're all believers here. Think about the relief that we feel when we think on Jesus and we think about what he's done. And it's just like there's no greater balm than whenever we feel his presence. And that's what he's calling to mind. And notice verse 6 is a very gentle rebuke. It would be very easy for Jesus, and this is kind of how we react sometimes, if John the Baptist came and said, bro, I'm not really sure you're him or not. What do you think? And it'd be very easy for Jesus to have said, what are you talking about, John? What's wrong with you, John? Don't you remember, John? Come on, bud. Get with it. But that's not what Jesus did. There's a very gentle rebuke here. It's a very gentle thing. He says, blessed is he that is not offended in me. John, just relax and let me unfold the things the way I'm going to unfold them. That's the message to John. And believe it or not, we all need to hear that message. Okay? Now I want to skip down to verse 11. Again, remember, I'm going to talk about the Cave of Machpelah, and I believe that this will tie into that. Okay? Just bear with me. But that's pretty cool, right? That's some good things to think about. He goes then, the disciples leave, and they go back and they take the message to John. And John's going to be killed soon. But then Jesus begins to talk to the crowd around them, and he talks to them about John the Baptist. And I don't want to go through all of that in detail, but I do want to focus upon this, verse 11, where it says, verily I say unto you, that among them that are born of women there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Now, when you look back, if you think about what the Jews there might have thought about that, those first century Jews, who was the greatest person in the Old Testament? Well, you got three main ones. You got Abraham, and you got David, and you got Moses. And yet, notice what the Lord is saying is, I got somebody greater than that, John the Baptist, right? And the reason that John the Baptist is greater than anyone else is because of his proximity. All of the men that I just mentioned and more, all of the Old Testament writers were pointing to Jesus Christ. That's the reason that their words were preserved. Yes, they give us history. Yes, they give us the law. Yes, they give us a lot of background. But all of this is to teach us about Jesus Christ. Isaiah could stand there and through faith say, there's a child that is coming in 700 years. Or Daniel could say, in 500 years, or whatever it is. But John the Baptist was the one who said, that's him right there, you see. And he baptized him. So that's why Jesus is saying there's none greater. But yet he's still in the Old Testament. We who are in the kingdom have something even greater. He says the least of us in the kingdom is more blessed, more favored of God than even John the Baptist. Why? Because we've been given a fullness of understanding of who the Lord is. There's a certain joy that we have. There's a certain assurance that we have. There's a certain blessing. There's the blessing of the Holy Spirit that's been given to us because Jesus has been raised from the dead. This is something that the Old Testament could only look forward to. The people in the Old Testament do. But there's something that we have. And that's the message of this. We have an inheritance in heaven that's reserved for us, as Peter talks about, but we have an earnest of that inheritance now. And that's why Jesus would say, even as great as John is, we are more blessed than that. And that brings me to the story of the Cave of Machpelah. Cave of Machpelah. So let's turn to Genesis 23. I don't want this just to be a history lesson, although it would do you good. Okay, any teaching out of the Bible is going to be profitable to us, but I want to ask you to continue to pray for me because I want to bring out some spiritual lessons here. These things really did happen, and they're in the Bible for a reason, and we may not perceive all of the reasons, but there's certainly some that are pretty evident here. In Genesis 23, we read about a time when Sarah, who is the wife of Abraham, has now died. Okay? Right? Abraham. You all know who Abraham is. When we look at the Bible, all of it is God's word, but the first 11 chapters or so in the book of Genesis cover a lot of time and a lot of actions. The creation of the world, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel, the division of the nations, and so on. All of these things happened, right? And Jesus bears witness to the fact that they did happen. So we do believe them. We may not understand every little thing about them, but we do know that that happened. But it's interesting that after covering seemingly thousands of years in the first 11 chapters, God is now going to spend the next 9 or 10 chapters covering 25 years in the life of Abraham. So this is pretty important. God is going to start telling us about his redemptive plan that, of course, he formulated before the world ever began in his son, Jesus Christ. And the very first promises that God makes to this man is he says that in your seed, and ultimately that's a reference to Jesus, who's a son of Abraham, son of David, says, in him shall all the families of the earth be blessed. God's plan was to always bless the world through his son, Jesus Christ. Every nation, every family, there would be those who would be blessed of God. We were all going to be together praising him out of every nation, kindred, and tongue. And so you know the story, how that Abraham, the father of faith, and we're sons of Abraham as spiritual sons of Abraham as believers in Jesus Christ. But you know how that Abraham himself had to go through some journeying. He had to go through some difficulties. He had to wait 25 years before the seed of seed of promise, Isaac, was born. And I alluded to earlier how that he helped out the Lord by having Ishmael by Sarah's handmaid Hagar. But here we now come to the time of their life that Isaac is now. He's now grown. He's about 37 years of age now. And it's time for Sarah to die. Sarah dies at 127 years of age. Abraham goes on to live another, 48 years? 48. Is that right? He lives to be 175. But Abraham is grieved. And I want us to think about what's going on here. So with that background, let's go ahead and get to it. Genesis 23. Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Remember, she was 10 years younger than Abraham. And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba. The same is Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham stood up from before his dead and spake unto the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying unto him, Hear us, my Lord. Thou art a mighty prince among us. In the choice of our sepulchres bury thy dead. None of us shall withhold from thee his sepulchre, but that thou mayest bury thy dead. And Abraham stood up, and he bowed himself to the people of the land, even to the children of Heth. They were very courteous in this day. And he communed with them, saying, If it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and entreat for me to Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which means part or portion or even fold, Machpelah, which he hath, which is in the end of his field. For as much money as it is worth, he shall give it me for a possession of a burying place amongst you. Now, let me explain to you just real quickly that the way they did business in the Bible and the way they did business, especially 4,000 years ago, is a little bit different than the way we do business today. If I wanted to do a business deal today, I would just come up and say, hey, I got an idea. I've got, I'll give you this for that. And we would shake hands on it or negotiate or whatever. It would be a very straightforward kind of negotiation. And, in some cases it could be, rather acrimonious as people try to buy a new car. Devin's not here, but we can talk about that. He enjoys haggling for hours, to get a new car. But what I want you to see here is that this is a far more refined way of doing it. In this way of thinking, it's sort of like, you don't just do a straight up business transaction. It's sort of like Abraham is going to give a gift and the other people are going to give a gift, and that's how this is going about. So Abraham says, I would like to buy a field. I would like you to give me a field. And they said, okay, whichever one you would like. And he identifies the specific one that he wants. And as we'll continue reading, you'll see that Ephron comes forward and says, oh, no, take it. It's all yours. I want you to have it. And Abraham says, I'm not going to just take it. I will pay you for it. He says, well, what's it? It's worth 400 pieces of silver, but what's that between us? Just take it. And Abraham knew. So I want you to see that this is a business transaction, but there's a lot of grace in it as well. But Abraham chose the place that he wanted to buy, and as you continue reading, you can see that he gave 400 shekels, 400 pieces of silver. I did a little research on that. Just in case you're curious, that's about 200 ounces of silver, 200 troy ounces of silver. So it's a fairly, priestly sum. And Abraham buys this cave, right? That's pretty straightforward, right? It's just something that's in the Bible. And then you read 19 and 20. It says, and after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, the same as Hebron in the land of Canaan. And the field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abraham for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. Another thing that was far more common in Bible times versus now is these kinds of business transactions were public. They didn't have a local registrar like what we do, go down to the county courthouse and register your deed or anything. You basically gathered at the gate of the city and you made the exchange in front of everybody. Everybody understood, and from that point forward, everybody knows that this land now belongs to Abraham. I mean, think about the book of Ruth. Fast forward a couple of, 1,000 years or so, and, the same thing. Boaz is in the city of the gate of the city of Bethlehem, and he makes this likewise purchase. This is how things are done. But think about this. God has promised Abraham all of the land. He says, you're going to just be a sojourner in it for now. You're going to wander around, but I'm going to give it to your descendants. I'm going to give it to your seed. In one sense, the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the children of Israel are going to possess this land, right? But what he's saying in a more general sense is that your seed is going to possess this land. That is Jesus Christ. I hope you can see that what's going on here is that though Abraham owned all the land and it was all his, the only piece that he actually possessed was a place to bury his dead. That's all he had. All he had was a field. I mean, the field didn't matter. The only reason he bought the field was because he could have the cave. And the only thing that mattered, now think about what is important to Abraham. Abraham is thinking about the faithfulness of God. And that's what this really is. Notice, as a possession, the only place that he owned, that he could actually say, this is my land. All of it's mine, but the only part of it that I really kind of possess is this one that is looking forward. I mean, why did Abraham bury Sarah? Why bury her? Because he knows she's going to live again. And he wants her to wake up in the land that she's been given. Do you see that? That's what the hope of the resurrection really is, right? This shows, by Abraham doing this, Abraham is showing his faith in God. He believes God and his covenant faithfulness. He's promised the land to him, and he knows that it's going to be something that's in the future. He knows that it's going to be something beyond his own lifetime, but he says, we want to be here to observe it. We want to be here. We want to be in the land, because he's not thinking about this world. He's thinking about the world to come. And the most prized possession that he has is a place that links him to that which is to come. Do you see that? This is all, I understand it's all metaphorical. It's all allegorical. It's all fuzzy. This is how the Old Testament works. But clearly in this idea of purchasing this land, by the way, which is near Hebron, in the land of Judah, is pretty significant geographically. God doesn't just do things willy-nilly. He's showing us the fulfillment. Because you see, there's another son of Abraham who's also going to have a grave, who's also going to come in and be buried, but he's going to come forth, right? All of these promises that are given are looking forward and fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Not just the natural land of Israel, but the new heavens and the new earth, which God is going to bring forth for us when he returns. You see, that's what this is looking forward to. The faithfulness of God, the hope of the resurrection, the understanding that the most precious thing that we have in this life is looking forward to the fulfillment of all of God's promises. That's the significance of this burial. And once again, I will say, remember, it's in Hebron, which is about 20 miles south of Jerusalem. It's right smack dab in the middle of Judah is where it's at, okay, geographically. It's going to be another 1,000 years or more before the nation is even split into two, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. But this is right there in the middle. And oh, by the way, Hebron, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the Bible in Hebron, but one of the most significant is that's where David was crowned. David was crowned in the same place where Abraham was buried. And that's not a coincidence. That's showing us that all of these promises are going to be fulfilled, not only by just the son of Abraham and the promise, but the son of David, right? Who is Jesus Christ. So that's some of the things, the aspects of this. The only land that Abraham owned, although he had title to all of it, and it would be fulfilled in his son, was a burying place, showing forth his belief in the covenant and faithfulness of God, that he would in fact come through. He knew that would be true. If we skip over to Genesis chapter 49, we find who all is buried in this burial plot, right? It says that when Jacob, now Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob. If you're doing your your daily Bible studies through Genesis, this should all be kind of fresh to you. But when Jacob came to the end of his days, he was reunited with Joseph in Egypt, and as an old man he passed, though he had great strength to the end. He charges his children to bury him in the cave of Machpelah. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is Genesis 49:28. And this it is, their father spake unto them and blessed them. Every one according to his blessing he blessed them. And he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. Well, now we know what that is, right? That's the one that Abraham had purchased. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife, There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, and there I buried Leah. Leah. I can never remember to say it. Is it Leah or is it Leah? I think it's Leah. Leah. Okay. You know who we're talking about. The older sister of Rachel. Yeah, Rachel. Remember, Rachel wasn't buried in this cave. Rachel was buried in Bethlehem, right? Outside of Bethlehem, right? But why are we burying these? Because of the hope of the resurrection. Because this life is not all that there is. It's looking forward to. And by the way, just so you're not getting the point here, that's the kind of life we're supposed to have. If we're going to be members of the church, walking in the kingdom of fellowship, God gives us things to enjoy in this life, and that's all well and good. But our most prized possession should be those things that map to this cave. We're looking forward to being with Him. And obviously the church is the place where the King, we meet with Him each week, where we find His blessings. So we've got this first cave, this first possession in the land. But that's not the only one. Let's continue reading. Because we're going to read in Genesis 33 that Jacob also bought some land. Okay? Jacob also bought some land. He bought some land near Shechem. Interesting. In Genesis 33, we're going to go back in time now. We just read about Jacob on his deathbed. Let's go back. And Jacob came to Salem. This is chapter 33, verse 18. Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padanaram and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. I'm assuming that 100 pieces of money are the same kind of silver coin, right? And he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. El Elohe Israel. It means that the God of Israel is a mighty God. The God of Israel. And by Israel, not just the people, but He Himself, Israel. My God is a mighty God. That's the name. Now, this is interesting because here's another piece of property that has been purchased by the patriarchs. The first one, of course, was by Jacob's grandfather down south near Hebron. That's the Cave of Machpelah. But here we find another parcel of land that was purchased outside the city of Shechem. And Jacob does is he erects an altar there. Obviously, he wants a place where he can encamp and things like that and graze his cattle and all that. There's some bad things that happen in the next chapter, but let's set that aside for a moment. But there's actually three things that Jacob does with this parcel of land. Here we read that he builds an altar, but he also digs a well. He also digs a well, which we read about in John chapter 4 with the woman of Samaria, right? Okay. Well, he dug a well, right? And the third thing that he did was he buried his sons. He gave it to Joseph, right? And Joseph was buried there. And if I'm reading the scriptures correctly, all of the patriarchs were buried in this parcel of land. Isn't that cool? Okay, so we've got one down south, Machpelah, and we've got another one up north. Now, what's the significance of Shechem? Well, as I alluded to you in the 4th chapter of the book of John, that's where Jesus goes to meet with the woman of Samaria, right? He specifically goes. Largely, his whole ministry is to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but he specifically says, I have an appointment. I need to go. And he specifically goes and meets with that woman of Samaria, and with great plainness of speech, he reveals to her that he is the Messiah, and she runs to go tell the people that she'd been avoiding previously. This shows us the spreading of the gospel, how the gospel, this is a foretaste of how the gospel is to be spread. The Jews are not going to accept it. The Jews of Jesus' time largely reject it. Not all of them. You know, the apostles and Apostle Paul and others. But for the large part, the message is about to go out, and that's what this represents, among other things. The spreading of the gospel to other than those who are of Judah, right? To the Samaritans and to others. Because if you think about it, this is kind of cool. Shechem is pretty much right in the middle of Israel. Yeah, it is. The northern tribe of Israel. You get it on the map and you kind of look it out. I'm not saying it's exactly within so many feet. But here you got something right in the midst of Judah, right? The Cave of Machpelah near Hebron. And then you got another one that's owned up in the land of Ephraim, right? Near Shechem. Later the Samaritans are going to be there, right in the middle of Israel. And think about all the promises that God made, that he's not going to just save the descendants of Judah, but he's also going to save all of Israel, right? This promise of the resurrection. And why are they burying the dead? For a hope of the resurrection. So we see two pieces here that are pointing forward with that same hope, that knowledge that God is going to be faithful. Someday he's going to send his son, the descendant is going to come, and it's with that hope of the resurrection. You see, they're not necessarily, I'm not saying that they expect to step out and own that land. I don't know that. But what I do know is what it's showing us is that when we get someone in the ground, when we bequeath them and commend them to God, we know that God's coming back and they're going to walk around on the new heavens and the new earth. This is what we've been promised. This is what has become a reality by Jesus Christ. That's what's being patterned by this. And I think that's exceptionally cool. Now, let's go to Acts chapter 7. I'm almost done, but there's a couple more points that I want to make. And one is that in Acts chapter 7, we find this man in the New Testament. Jesus Christ has come. He's been rejected by the people. He's been crucified. He's been laid in a tomb. On the third day, he rises. He shows himself alive, right? He spends the next 40 days manifesting himself to them, so they absolutely know with many infallible proofs that he's the Lord. And now he ascends to heaven and he gives them a job. He says, you go forth and you preach the gospel of the kingdom. And that's what they did, okay? They were met with a great deal of opposition, though. And Stephen is the first recorded martyr. That is someone who was killed because of their profession of Jesus Christ. And so when we read in Acts chapter 7, Stephen, who was one of the 7 who were chosen to be the deacons, the ones that went forth and ministered to the Hellenized Jews, he also had a gift to preach, and he did. He was very able. And of course, he gets stoned to death. But notice what he says about these caves. I'm just going to pick up the thought. I want you to read all of chapter 7 of Acts. But if you look at chapter 7, verse 15, it says, So Jacob went down into Egypt and died, he and our fathers, and were carried over into Sychem, which is Shechem, and laid in the sepulchre that Abraham bought for a sum of money for the sons of Emor, the father of Sychem. Now, the critic, the skeptic, the mocker, the one who scoffs is going to say, well, there's an error in the Bible right there, because Jacob, I just read to you, Jacob was not buried at Shechem. He wasn't buried in the possession up north. He bought that land. His sons were buried there, but Jacob, as I read to you, was actually buried down south. But what I'm going to say to you is that that's not an error. And that's not like Stephen didn't know the Old Testament and he's confusing his metaphors. He's combining the two. So what the Father did, the Son just bookends it. He refers to the Son, but he's referring it back to Abraham. You see, and that's a very important principle, because ultimately our righteousness and salvation is not what we do, but being related back to our Father and our older brother, Jesus Christ. No, what he's doing is he's referring to both possessions as one possession. And I want you to see that. And the reason for that is very simple. It's one hope. It's the hope of the church. You see, what these caves represent is just an Old Testament manifestation of what we clearly, plainly see, and that is Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of all that has been given. He is dead and he's buried and he's risen again. And when we die with hope, and we lay out knowing that he's coming again. And we have every bit as much assurance as these Old Testament prophets did. In fact, what Jesus said is, the whole reason I've come is to restore that type of Christ-centered, messianic, simple worship. We worship the same way that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. We have a lot more knowledge, but at the end of the day, that's what they were worshiping. They were worshiping this coming Messiah. And so were we. Isn't that cool? All right. In closing, then, I want to go to the book of Hebrews, and we will be done. Hebrews chapter 11. We can now kind of understand perhaps it better, and our beloved brother Brother Mark has been preaching us through the book of Hebrews, and I commend that to your further study because there's so much good in here. But you can see all that's in the book of Hebrews is looking back to all these promises that God has made, and he's fulfilled in Jesus. If you just let me pick up a couple of sections of verses out of this larger text, I want you to focus on that. Hebrews 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. And he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Can you see how that's fulfilled in the fact that Abraham was given the reign of the land, and sometimes he camped down south and sometimes he went north. He believed God that all of the land would be given to him and ultimately to his seed, that his descendant, Jesus Christ. But the one part that he did own had view toward that promise. He was content to not own all the land. He didn't need to because he already did. What he focused on was that which served his needs, to be a witness to God's faithfulness. Okay? Look at verse 13. Skipping forward after having mentioned others, he says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they had come out, they might have had an opportunity to have returned. But now they desired a better country, that is in heavenly, where God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. And they knew that. And that's why the only land that Abraham needed was the place to bury his dead, and for him to be buried, because he knew that someday he would see that city. Right? And that's how we need to be living. That's how we need to be living as well. 2 more verses and I'll be done. Very last 2 verses in this chapter. He says, and these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. What's that better thing? It's the gospel. Right? It's the knowledge of Jesus Christ. It's what's been fulfilled to us. That's where Jesus started off with John. The poor have the gospel preached to them. And that's why Jesus could say that the smallest in the kingdom is greater than even the greatest one in the Old Testament. Why? Because we now see clearly. What a great blessing has been given to us to understand the fullness, to the extent that we can, of and how it's described, of who Jesus is and what he's accomplished, what he has done. He has gone to heaven, and as Peter said, there's an inheritance, all right, that is eternal and incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, that is reserved in heaven for you who are kept through God by the power of faith. Right? By God. I will read it. I don't want to botch my closing thing, but we need to read this. 1 Peter. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. And someday it will be revealed. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. God bless you all.